welcome to this week's episode of Bird Brain. This week, I am joined by none other than Stephen Moss. For those of you that have been listening a while, Stephen was my first ever guest on Bird Brain. And weirdly, Stephen, I realised today we literally recorded 2 years ago. It was in November that we recorded.
That's right. And it was on owls, wasn't it? We talked about owls.
It was. We talked about Hedwig and snowy owls. And basically, what that means is that Stephen championed Bird Brain when nobody else was really sure what the concept was. He kindly humored me. And basically, to this day, you are still the most streamed episode. The most people give me compliments on yours, Stephen. And it basically has launched the rest of the podcast. And my episode with you, despite all my nerves and being new, and Holly the dog featured because we recorded live at your house. Basically, you've helped me have this platform. So thank you so much for coming back.
You're very welcome. And we're talking about the robin, which of course is even more popular. We'll probably break the internet, Kelly,
A
if we
hundred
talk about
percent.
robins. You just mention robins and it's like bang.
Yeah, two nerds breaking the internet talking about robins near Christmas. Because by the time I release this, I'm obviously going to time it to be with Christmas. And we will talk about why in a moment. But for people that haven't listened to earlier episodes or aren't so familiar with you yet, do you mind just letting people know what it is that you do?
Well, I call myself a naturalist and author. People think I'm a wildlife TV producer, and I used to be for about, nearly 35 years. But I gave that up a few years ago for my sanity. I did
Yeah.
for Spring Watch. I basically write books on birds. I talk about birds. I go on birding trips. I occasionally lead people to see birds. I think I use the phrase an evangelist for nature and particularly birds. So yeah, my job is basically to convert people who aren't already passionate about birds and haven't seen the light into how wonderful they are.
Well, I mean, you're obviously already talking to a convert, but in terms of what you're working on at the moment, if that's top secret, then pivot and tell me what your latest release is. But if you're allowed to talk about what you're working on, come on, give us a sneak peek.
I am. The latest release is The Starling,
Yeah.
which we will probably touch on later, which is the sixth in my biography series, bird biographies. So I've done the robin, of course, the wren, the swallow, the swan, the owl, and the starling. And I'm now working on the puffin. Everyone goes, which is fantastic because puffins are probably the only British bird that rivals the robin in terms of people's absolute passion for them. They're
What's there not to like? The collective noun for a puffin is a circus. I mean, who doesn't like that sort of frippery? And they look like they should be bigger than they are. I think everybody
Yes,
who sees them is shocked that they only really stand around 30 centimeters high.
that's right. They're about the size of a milk bottle
Yeah.
or a 10-pin bowling. I think probably smaller than the average one of those. Yeah, they're pretty small. The other weird thing about puffins is most people haven't seen them, and if they have seen them, they've had to go a long way to do so.
Yeah.
But this is a bird that spends 8 months of the year away from land, so we never see it then. And yet it is so powerful in our minds, which is so odd because obviously the robin's popular because they're in our gardens. But the fact that the puffin is as well. So yeah, that's going to be the next book. That will not come out this Christmas because I had what my daughter calls a gap year, where I didn't write for a year. And this is going to come out in October 2026. So yeah, not that long.
I saw the puffins this year at ScoMa.
Yeah.
I just can't get over them. I adore them. I can't get enough of the puffins. I love the fact that they just don't look like they belong on land as well. Like when they land, they look a bit confused and they kind of stomp around, and it looks like their mate is probably calling them to tell them where to go, as if they couldn't quite navigate without their mate yelling their name. Like I can imagine them being like, Stephen, Stephen, you know that, you remember those animated adverts? Well, I think they were Aardman, actually.
They were, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
the
no,
way they're just like,
absolutely.
Dave, Dave.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. And of course, they're not a land bird, they're a seabird. And as the great seabird enthusiast Peter Harrison, who I've interviewed for this book, said once, real birds eat fish.
Yes.
Although some real birds eat worms, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I guess it depends what sort of birding fan you are, really. Without any further ado, you've already mentioned that the robin is of significance. Do you mind telling the audience what our topic is today? Obviously, we've mentioned that it is the robin, but why?
Well, we're going to talk about the Aardman Animations film, Robin Robin. So good they named it twice. And that's a fairly short film by their standards, not like the big Wallace and Gromit features or Chicken Run or Shaun the Sheep. But it's a very interesting film because it uses the Robin and it uses Christmas as a way of talking about some aspects of Robin behaviour, although to be fair, not all. But anyway, it's an interesting film to watch.
I just adore Robin Robin. I know that that's probably also something to do with my age and the fact that Aardman Animations, as someone from South Wales, even though Aardman Animations is based in Bristol and was massive around there, by default, that's close enough, to where I'm from. Aardman captured everybody's heart, I think, when I was young. I used to have Wallace and Gromit cards, those kind of big cardboard ones of certain scenes.
Yeah.
And I would put them in frames on my wall. I had a Wallace and Gromit photo album. And I think for a lot of people, that stop motion with claymation was so exciting and so playful and so skillful.
Yes, and so
And he
original. I mean, Nick Park is a genius without question. And
absolutely.
also, and I've met him a couple of times. I actually took him birding a few years ago, and he's also an incredibly nice man. Very modest, very charming, very delightful, as you'd expect. So yeah, I'm a huge fan myself.
Robin Robin's nice as well because it's the first foray of theirs into using needle felt as well as clay.
Yeah,
So the robin, the magpie, the cats, like the central characters, the mice as well, they are all needle felted. And I found that really interesting because I think because it's a film that centers around winter and Christmas, that textured element of those characters adds a sort of layer of warmth to it, which is quite an
yes,
interesting thing to have played with. So, for people that haven't seen Robin Robin, it's really short by film standards, but it's like 32 minutes long, which, to be fair, for a stop motion film, still involves a lot of work. And it's the story of an individual robin that is raised by mice. It considers itself a mouse for most of the film. It's joined by a magpie, and it also has a few issues with a certain predatory neighborhood cat. So, this whole story is really about a robin that's trying to find its place. What does it mean to be a robin? What does family mean? If you're different, are we all still somehow the same? Age-old themes, really, that tend to appear in films and books for young people, but also resonate with us as adults.
absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm. So, obviously, we've mentioned what it's about. You've already alluded to how much it's bound up with British Christmas imagery. Why do you think that this small territorial bird is such a big festive symbol?
Well, there is a very specific reason. Well, there are two specific reasons for it. When I was writing the original biography, the Robin biography, I wanted to do a book that was about Britain's favourite bird. And that was sparked by my old friend David Lindo, the urban birder, who'd done a poll in, I think, 2016, 17, around then, because he realised that we didn't have a national bird. We thought it was the robin, but no one had actually done it officially, and he did a brilliant job. And he did a poll, and guess what? The Robin won, and it won by miles. It was three times as many votes as the next, which I think was barn owl and then blackbird. So but the paradox of the robin is as you've just alluded to, Kelly, it's a very territorial bird. It lives in our gardens, but it doesn't welcome other robins. If you look at
Yeah.
the bird count, the Christmas, the the RSPB's Big Garden Bird Watch every year. Robin's fairly low down the list because the RSPB, in their infinite wisdom many years ago, decided that the number of birds was relevant, not how many gardens they were in, which I think was a mistake, which is why starling and sparrow always come top because they're very sociable birds and robins really aren't. So robin's in there, it's in most gardens, but you usually see one. If you see two robins, they're either a male and female or they're going to have a fight.
Oh.
Going back to the Christmas thing, that is fascinating because the main reason robins are associated with Christmas is that they are an insectivorous bird that is a resident bird. And in the old days, before you were around, in during my childhood and before that, it used to snow in winter, and it not, didn't just snow; it was really cold. And when it's really cold and it snows, birds that feed on the ground, like the robin, really struggle. Uh, and so robins would fluff themselves up because they were very cold and very hungry and come to our back doors and effectively beg for food because they were literally going to die if they didn't eat. Small birds like the robin have to eat between a third and a half of their body weight every day in winter. That's very difficult.
A
And in those
lot.
days, we didn't really feed garden birds very much. When my nan would sort of throw out a few crumbs or bits of stale bread or suet or something, you know. Um, and so robins started to come to our back door, and people rather liked that. And because they fluff their feathers up, they look cute. And because they have large eyes compared to other birds, and that's because they hunt at dawn and dusk in woods, that's where they evolved. So they
Ooh.
have larger eyes than other birds related to their body and a larger head. They fulfill the theory that says we love things that look like human babies. Human babies
Yeah.
have large eyes and heads compared to their body. As they grow up, their head grows, but not as fast as their body. So adults, aren't as cute looking.
Ah,
Hey,
you see this in even in things
cartoons.
like, well, you see it in ridiculous things though, like Jurassic Park, right? And in films, in horror films, sometimes they use that trope where there's a
Absolutely.
cute creature because it has some kind of big eyes or something, and the
ET.
human gets all this is cute, and then it
Yeah, then it eats
savagely
you.
eats
Yeah.
them.
Well, that's you basically summed up the robin because what the robin does is that it looks cute and then it attacks fellow male robins particularly and kills them. Not very often, but they do occasionally fight to the death. And so robins became very familiar with people, more familiar probably than even other garden birds in those days because people didn't have bird feeders. So I'm talking about the Victorian era. So bird feeding wasn't really a thing at that point. But people would be sympathetic with the robin and throw out food. Then what happened is the post office was founded, and postmen wore red uniforms and were nicknamed robins. And then the
Wow.
deputy head of the post office, and this is all in the book, which is available for Christmas gifts. Um,
Yeah,
the
perfect
the
Christmas gift.
the deputy head of the post office came up with a really clever marketing idea. Cards existed. People would do handmade cards to send to their Valentine and things like that. But Christmas cards were not really a thing. And the Post, it is 1840, the Post started. And soon afterwards, this guy came up with this idea of creating Christmas cards. And guess what? Lots of artists commissioned to do them drew a little robin. And they often drew a robin dressed as a postman or postwoman.
Oh wow.
And there's a Trollope novel, Anthony Trollope novel, I can't remember which one it is, one of the Pallisers novels, where this woman says, "Oh, come in, Miss Postman Robin, and warm yourself at the stove," because that was their nickname. So there is a link between Christmas and robins. And now, when you get Christmas cards over the next few weeks, you will see that roughly a third of them still have robins on.
It's so interesting. And it's, isn't it funny? Because there, we always anthropomorphize things, right? But it's really funny to see, to me, the idea of a postman being referred to as a robin. Like we've kind of taken it the other way. We're taking our nods from nature.
Yeah. Now, the other point about robins is that when I was growing up, my nan, who brought me up, because my mum was a single mum, she went out to work. My nan was at home bringing me up. My nan would call birds by nicknames. So she would say Jenny Wren, Tomtit, and Robin Redbreast. And you still hear Jenny Wren occasionally.
Yeah.
People use it, older people use it. Now, there's one of those is the odd one out, and it's the robin, because we don't call wrens Jenny. We don't say, "Oh, I saw a Jenny this morning,"
No.
but we do say, "I saw a robin." That's not the robin's name. The
Oh,
robin's
really?
real name is redbreast. It was
Just redbreast.
Yeah, it was originally ruddock in the Anglo-Saxon times, which is a means little red bird, like dunnock means little brown bird. And then what happened was that robins were given the nickname Robin Redbreast because Robin is a diminutive of Robert, like Robin Hood, Robin Goodfellow. So Robin is like a sort of, like Willie for William or Billy.
Yeah.
And so, or Tom for Thomas, indeed. So, and Jenny for Jennifer, actually. So Robin was a nickname given to robins, and it became the official name. But not until the 1950s did it actually. I mean, it was used many years before that. So, these are fascinating things. When I write these books, I learn so much about the bird, particularly that first one with the robin. And the other thing I learned, which really, really intrigued me, was I've mentioned the fact that robins are regarded as cute, and I mentioned the two physical characteristics of them, the large eye and the fluffing themselves up and being a little
Yeah.
bit plump. Um, these are behavioural characteristics
Hmm.
have shaped their folklore, and this is true of all the birds in my series, and I suspect it's true of all birds, that the folklore related to a bird almost always emerges in some form from its behavior or its characteristics.
Yes, more than its physicality, right?
Yeah, sometimes
It's behavior.
physicality, the wren, the short wing wren, the sort of weirdness of the wren, but we can get onto that. But yeah, so I discovered that most robin folklore, I mean, for example, in Babes in the Wood, the old fairy tale, the robins cover that it's very, very gory story about two children who are lured into the woods by their uncle and killed. I mean, it's horrible. And the bodies are found by Robin, and the robin covers them with leaves. Well, what do robins do in autumn? They turn leaves over in woodlands because they're a ground feeding bird to try to find food. So again, that folklore thing relates to that.
Oh, that's really interesting. I've never thought about that
Yeah.
one.
So, well, it's the great joy about when you write a book about a bird, you learn, it's called a biography because it is. I tried to cover, I explained again at the beginning of the Robin book that I tried to cover two aspects of Robin's lives. One is the real Robin. So
Yeah.
the biological robin, if you like, the ecological robin, what it does, where it lives, how it behaves, all that. That's all in there. But the second robin, which to me is equally important, is the cultural robin. It's the folklore, it's the
Yes.
history, it's what it means to us, which, as you say, is deeply anthropomorphic. But I'm not ashamed of being anthropomorphic because we are innately anthropomorphic about
Yes.
animals. We hate spiders and snakes and love robins, and there are reasons for that. And as long as you know why you're writing about a bird in an anthropomorphic way, that's fine. You have to be aware that you're doing it, but that's how I feel about it.
Now, obviously, we're going to spend most of the episode chatting about Robbins and the film. But as you're a writer, it is interesting to me as you're talking about your process. I can hear how you're structuring your notes. I can imagine you with, okay, this is the physiology, this is the folklore culture. I can hear that process as you're explaining. But you said you've written six already in this series,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
obviously you've been writing, for people that don't know, this series is not Stephen's first entrance into his writing of books. What year did you release your first book in, Stephen?
Gosh, 1994, I think, or five. It was a book called Birds and Weather. It was the first book I wrote on my own. I'd done a one with a colleague about the weather for the BBC when I wrote work there, but that was the first one. And then actually the first 11 books I wrote were all very factual books
Yep.
about um, attracting birds to your garden, understanding bird behavior, how to bird watch. They were effectively not reference books, they were sort of guide
Manuals or guides on how
guidebooks,
to
yeah.
engage.
How to put a nest box up and,
Yeah.
what to feed garden birds. So they didn't look like what we'd call new nature writing, creative
Hmm.
fiction that you and I know well, and so and actually the first proper book I wrote, if you like to call it that, although the others are proper books just in a different way, was actually a history book about bird watching in I wrote it in 2000 and well, it took me about 7 years. I think it was published in 2004, called A Bird in the Bush, and that was a history of bird watching. But I used a lot of the techniques that historians and nature writers use without really being aware I was doing it. That sort of creative technique of trying to
Yeah.
put the reader in the place. And later on, partly through reading other books, partly through and then of course I taught you, of course, on
Yeah.
our MA in Nature and Travel Writing at Bath Spa. I started to analyze how I write, which is always slightly dangerous. My friend Dominic Cousin said, "Oh gosh," he said, I'm terrified about doing that. It would stop me doing it." And I know exactly what he means. You shouldn't think too hard about how you do it, but it's useful for me to have a method. And as you say, with the Robin and all these biographies, I I actually start by reading all the other authors. So I
Yes.
read Gilbert White and Thomas Bewick and William Yarrell and William McGillivray. All these are ancient writers from the 19th, 18th, 19th centuries. And then I read more modern writers, men and women who have referred to the robin, some or whatever the bird is, sometimes in quite scientific books, sometimes in more general um, monographs and nature writing and things. Um, and I basically type up, it's a very, very tedious process, but I type up lots of quotes from those books and then I
Yeah.
put them in order. And then I sort of think, okay, that will go in this chapter because the Robin is January to December. It's a year
Hmm.
in the life of the Robin. And that structure of either seasons or months tends to be what I use for each of these.
You're approaching it like an academic does, even if you
Yeah,
haven't realized it, because that's what they do, isn't it? They look at the canon of work that's come before them, even when you are in, research. It doesn't need to be in a creative field. That's the academic's bread and butter, isn't it? You need to look at the canon that exists, and
yeah.
within that, you find the threads that you feel are unfinished, or there are gaps, or you think
Yes.
that now the
And
time has changed,
I'm
all
joining
fill
them
in the
together
blanks.
in a different way. I'm taking books that tend to be ornithologies or more scientific books and using that, which is fascinating, but then using the culture as well. So, for example, with the Robin, I mentioned Babes in the Wood. There's Who Killed Cock Robin. Had I don't think the film Robin Robin had come out when I
No,
definitely
they
hadn't
hadn't.
when I wrote the book, but I would have quoted from that. And with the puffin, I'm quoting from my son Charlie. He said to me, "Oh, Dad, yeah, there's puffins in Happy Feet. There's a puffin in Happy Feet." I said, "No, darling, it's I was doing my mansplaining thing. No, that's penguins." And he went, "Dad, Happy Feet 2 has got a puffin in it that he's blown from the North Atlantic to the South Atlantic and tries to teach the penguins to fly." And I'm like, "Charlie, you've just given me a lovely little section of my book."
Yeah. I
Because
haven't seen Happy Feet 2.
I
That is
haven't seen Happy Feet 2, but clearly he has. It was Happy Feet
clearly
1
we
was
need
the
to
first
watch
film
it.
he ever saw. I remember that when he was 2. So that obviously made an impression. But
Yeah.
yeah, so that's how I do it really.
Okay.
Probably ought to get back to the Robin.
Oh, that's fine. Uh, what are robins actually doing in winter while they're appearing on Christmas cards and TV specials?
Yeah, that's a very good question. They are basically the only purpose of a robin in winter is to survive.
Yeah.
And the only reason to survive is to reach the next breeding season, usually their first, sometimes their second, very rarely any higher than that, because almost all robins die before they're three. And basically their role, whether they're male or female, is to reach the next breeding season and reproduce. It's what I used to call the race to reproduce, or still call the race to reproduce. That is the purpose of being a living creature. Basically, it's the biological purpose is to promote your genes by having lots of young. And so, that's what robins do. That's what all the birds in the garden do. It's fascinating. So that's why we put bird feeders up. I'm currently working for company Netview, a Chinese company that make bird feeders with cameras, and I'm learning a lot from watching this because I can look on
Yeah.
my phone app. And in fact, I was in Shenzhen at their headquarters year and a half ago, and it was February, and I looked at my app to see what was happening on my feeder, thinking, "Oh, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I wonder what will be on the feeder." It wasn't 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I got my timing wrong. Morning on a dark February night in Somerset with no moon, and the camera works at night, works black and white at night, and there was a robin feeding on my feeder at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, God, that's something I didn't know that they do that. I know they
No.
sing at night sometimes. That's for different reasons. They often sing at night in cities because the lights come on and they think it's dawn, and one of them starts singing, and then the neighbour starts singing because robins are very territorial. And suddenly it's that arms race of all singing together. So I knew that, but I didn't know that on my, you know, bird feeder in the countryside there would be a robin sitting there. So that was something I learned. But yeah, basically they're trying to survive, and robins are pretty good at surviving.
Yeah.
They are a woodland bird, and on the continent they are only a woodland bird. I mean, there aren't many gardens in gardening isn't a big thing I'm half Italian, and my family do not have a garden in Italy. They have a flat, and that's very common. Um, but in Britain, we have a lot of gardens, and robins are one of the birds that have adapted brilliantly to living in gardens where they have all the things they need, and particularly bird feeders. So during the winter, the robin comes up on my feeder. I can, as I say, I can see it with my camera, my app somewhere else, or I can look out my window of my office and see it. Um, so robins have learnt to adapt to feeders. Um, and we love feeding garden birds. It's a big thing that we do. So, they're doing that. They are also defending their territory. That's very unusual in winter. Most birds do not defend a territory in winter. Most birds flock together. Birds like tits. You can walk into a wood and you'll hear calls, and you'll see great tits and blue tits and coal tits and marsh tits and sometimes tree creepers and goldcrests all together. They're working together to get food because
Yes.
there's no point in having a territory. Robins are different. Robins
Really?
into territory, which is why they sing from about September onwards. I do a bike ride every morning, and in July and August I hear very little. Everything stops singing, and then in September robins start singing again, and males and female robins will defend territories in winter. Um, Partly because it's a good idea. If you defend a territory, you've got food. Not many other birds do that in winter. Missel thrushes do. Wrens, I think, do because wrens have started singing in winter in a way they didn't used to when I was growing up. But and one of the other reasons we love robins is they sing all year round. Apart from
Yes.
summer, when they're molting and they finish breeding. So yeah, so robins are unusual in that they're not like a lot of garden birds, and particularly now it's very mild, and particularly if you live in southern Britain, they will start they'll often start singing in December, garden birds, but robins will accelerate their singing in January, February, and they will start they will start courting and finding a mate, and then they will start breeding in March, depending where you are, March, April, So yeah, that's what they're planning to do.
Okay.
And if they survive, they'll do it. But many, many robins, like most small birds, do not live very long. They live for between a year and 2 years. And actually, only about half will survive to their first birthday. But that's because an awful lot of small birds die soon
Yeah.
after fledging. They either starve or they get caught. We've gone a bit dark here, haven't we? But
Yeah, well, we're actually going to get a bit darker in a bit, but before we get there, I have a nice question. So we've warned people now. We're basically going to give them a shit sandwich. I'm going to say some nice stuff now, and then we get into the dark bit. I don't know if I meant to say shit sandwich on the podcast, but I've
I
said it, and I'm sticking with it.
it's a good one.
I in the film, our Robin is raised by mice. I mentioned earlier, right? And the mice teach the titular character to be a sneak. So they basically sneak into houses for crumbs, right? The Robin is terrible at this. The Robin is clumsy, it knocks things over, it's constantly causing capers and catastrophes
Yeah.
for the mice family. But the mice, they love it. They love the Robin and they try and put up with it. What I find interesting about this is obviously they're using that outcast or outsider, someone who's different theme, right? So this is a robin raised by mice. Now, I'm not going to ask you something as pedestrian as, is that possible? But what I am going to ask you is, what does that reflect on what we project onto robins culturally versus what they're actually like? That this is the bird. Like maybe they just picked it, like you said earlier, because the Christmas, the winter, how popular it is. But are there birds that would be more likely to maybe get on with other species or,
Uh, there are, but Robin's certainly on one of them.
yeah,
And yeah, I mean, I did struggle a bit with this. I absolutely accept it's a children's cartoon. A lot of what's in it is biologically accurate. The stuff about the magpie, played by the wonderful Richard E. Grant, loving, shiny things, that is absolutely true. That is
yeah,
not just folklore. Again, it is folklore based on reality. And the robin being, it's a colourful bird, it's obvious, you certainly notice it. If they wanted a sneaky bird, wren would have been the one. So I think for me, that was, that I slightly problematic, but I'm only being a pedantic birder. I also found the mice in the house a little bit, I don't really like mice in my house, and actually they're not house mice, they're wood mice because they live outside, and wood mice don't come into houses. But I'm not a biologist, and I seem to be turning into a pedantic biologist here. Um, in terms of it's a lovely story. It works as a story. You've got the drama, you've got the humour of the robin and the mice, you've got the humour of the magpie, which is a brilliant part, and
yeah.
and I know we'll come to this. We've got the drama of the cat, played by the legendary Gillian Anderson. Uh,
Legendary. And her voice, it's just
and yeah,
silk.
and again does a brilliant job. So yeah, it's a lovely little film. It doesn't have much basis in reality, but I suppose neither do Wallace and Gromit. I mean, Shaun the Sheep probably is. Shaun the Sheep is probably a more accurate portrayal of sheep.
Well, you know which one's the most accurate. It's Chicken Run. But
You know,
that's pretty
yes,
depressing how accurate that is. So I don't
yes.
know about it.
Yeah, no, that is true. So I think they slightly went off piste with this, but that's fine. I'm going to show Robin Robin. Now I've watched it again. I did watch it when it came out, but I'm going to show it to my 3-year-old grandson Sammy this Christmas.
Yeah.
Hope he doesn't get too scared by the cat, but I don't think he will. He's pretty tough. So yeah, it's a lovely film, but no, it doesn't really base. It's not really based. That part isn't based in biology. The cat bit is.
So, if you did have the creative license to choose another bird for this film to revolve around, you mentioned that the wren might be more suitable. Are there any other birds that especially thrive living as part of a flock? You mentioned that a lot of birds tend to do that in winter, and obviously this film's
Yes.
set in winter. What do you think is the gentlest sort of bird
Well,
that,
the two birds that are very sociable, the two garden birds that are very sociable, and I alluded to this earlier, are house sparrows and starlings. And
yeah,
I researched the starling for the last one in the series that came out last autumn. And I was absolutely fascinated. Again, I learned a huge amount. For example, I'd forgotten, and I have seen this, that starlings feed together in small flocks in the breeding season. Now, no other bird does this. All other birds, breeding birds, are territorial in the breeding season. They will tolerate other birds nearby, but they won't sit on a lawn and feed together. Starlings do that. Young
yeah,
starlings come out and they hang around with their parents in flocks for ages. And then later on, and someone asked me this the other day, someone writing an article, one of our students actually, Amy Brewer is writing an article on starlings. No,
oh,
sorry, it's not Amy, it's Leonore, one of the new students. Leonore's writing an article about starlings, and she said, Do the youngsters hang around with the adults?" And absolutely they do in small flocks in late summer, June, July,
yeah,
in a way that again, other birds, once robins fled from the nest, yes, they'll hang around with the parents for a week or two, and then they don't, they'll move on. So I think starlings are I mean, they are. I didn't give it a subtitle, that book, but if it had been, it would have been Britain's most sociable bird. And of course, in winter they do the murmurations, which are just
yeah.
starting now down the road from me in Somerset. Absolutely astonishing murmurations. So yeah, I think starlings, which get a very bad press because people call them, as Bill Oddie once said to me, my old friend Bill said, they're the bully of the bird table. But you know, people don't like them when they're in small groups in their gardens. You never see one starling, very
No,
rare.
you don't.
Um, but they love them when they're in those huge flocks. So yeah,
Yeah.
Aardman need to do a murmuration film about starlings.
Oh,
I did write to Nick
definitely.
when I knew they were doing the Robin book film and say I'm offering myself as a consultant, and I never heard back.
Hey,
Um,
well done though. That is a
so
good.
I think Starling would be the next one. I'd do that.
I think styling would be great. And not just that, it lends itself to needle felt because it's beautiful. You've got all those different
Yes.
strands of color through it.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Needlefelt. I recall, and you probably don't remember this series, but there was a series when I was growing up called The Clangers, which was these little
Yes.
that were made out of, I suppose, wool or needle
Yeah.
felt, you call it, knitted. They were knitted and they lived on a planet and made funny noises. And when you mentioned that, I thought, gosh, yes, the mice and the robin look like advanced versions of the clangers. And the clangers was, I think it was by Peter Firmin and Oliver Postgate, who were absolute geniuses at doing those early, very realistic animations, using
Yeah.
real things rather than animated as in cartoons. Know.
As someone who tells stories about birds for a living, so what did you make of how Aardman used storytelling to really make the Robin relatable to families and
Well,
children?
they create drama, don't they? They're very good.
Yeah.
They understand the notion. Ironically, not like most nature films, which frankly find mostly rather boring because they just
Yeah.
show here's more animals having sex or being violent to one another, and
Yeah.
here's another one doing exactly the same thing. And so everyone says, beautifully filmed, wonderfully filmed, astonishing, incredible.
Yeah.
My colleagues used to do that. I always wanted to make films that had a story, and actually working with people like Bill Oddie. Bill is a great storyteller,
Yeah.
remarkably brilliant storyteller. And he would always say, no, we need a drive to this program. We need to know why I'm there. What am I trying to see? What's the goal? Um, so yeah, I think Aardman do that very well. I think all their films are they're funny, they're clever, they're dramatic. And Robin Robin isn't an exception to that. It's shorter, as you say, but it's lovely, and it's got drama.
If you were going to give it a score out of 10,
I think nine, 8 or 9, probably 8.
whoa, nice high
I'm
score though.
slight, probably 8 actually. I'm slightly skeptical about the whole mouse thing, but
The mice, yeah, they should have used a house mice. Well, I think that I like to think that we're trying to rewild the imagination a bit, right? We're trying to present the natural world as full of personality. And this is a shift. You mentioned earlier that the new nature writing, and you've already mentioned just now about how traditionally a lot of information about nature is presented in an informative way,
yeah,
almost chronologically as well. Like so it will be, oh, here is the young or here is the parent. Then you've got the mating time, you've got the young being reared, you've got learning to feed, and then you've got being hunted or hunting. That it obviously has its place and is exceptionally important in understanding things. But I think we are definitely trying to present the natural world as full of personality now and not just being scenery in the background of things as well. We
yeah.
are trying to actually make nature a protagonist because I think, one, a lot of us relate to the natural world. We are part of it. It is part of us. It is not distinct.
Paradox is that we're part of nature, but we're separate.
Yeah.
And we're both separate in reality and we're separate in conception because we have theory of mind. And this is a tricky one. Most wild creatures don't, or they don't most of the time. There are theories now, and I go along with a lot of them. A man called Alexander Skutch, an amazing American ornithologist of the 20th century, wrote a book called The Minds of Birds. And certainly when you see ravens and you think, no, they are thinking
Yeah.
and thinking about being a raven. And I sort of go along with that without, while also knowing that, they don't write books about being ravens, we do.
Yeah.
So, I think that is the great tension at the heart of nature writing, that we are both part of nature and separate from it. But the biographies include, I deliberately, when I first did the treatment for the robin, I had the chapters on folklore and the chapters on the Christmas and the robin separately from the rest of the book. And my agent,
Oh,
Bruce, said, no, you need to integrate it because it's part of the same story. And she was spot on.
yeah.
It tells the story of the life of a robin, including the way we respond to it, rather than separating that. Because I do think the two are inextricably linked in a way that you know, and a film like Robin Robin shows that. However, it shows an imaginative conception of the link between a robin's real life and its imaginative life in our
And do
mind.
you do you think that that blend is encouraging meaningful connection with the natural world for children?
Yes, I think it does for children. I think it does for adults. I think there's an interesting report last week by a very fine uh, academic called Miles Richardson, who I've had some contact with, and he's written a report saying Britons are very low in the league table of connection with nature, which is
Oh,
really interesting because we have more members of nature organisations by miles than any other country. I mean, we have more members of the RSPB than the Audubon Society in America does, and they're a very
wow.
nature-loving country, and they have 5 or 6 times as many people as we do. We are way ahead. The National Trust, 5 million members, largest conservation organisation in the world. And yet, the paradox is that, according to this review, and I'm sure his research is correct, but I was slightly surprised by it, we're very low down the list of our genuine connection with nature, which is weird. And I now need to read his paper to see
Yeah.
how his research is done. But, he's a genuinely thoughtful academic, so I'm sure he's right. Um, and yet, we feed garden, 30 million people in Britain, at least 30 million households, sorry, I think it is, feed birds in their garden. It's an astonishingly
Huge number.
huge industry. And,
But I guess the argument would be that that is a transactional relationship with
oh, absolutely.
nature
Yes, it is.
because when you feed a garden bird, you get to watch and observe a garden bird and you get to enjoy that experience.
Yeah,
But
as is
if,
bird watching. I mean,
yeah,
bird watching is a transactional, but it's also more than that. It's
yeah, I don't think that's inherently bad either. Like, I think that that's a thing. But I guess overall, if you're looking at our relationship with nature more broadly, the National Trust membership, the RSPB membership, bird feeding, these things are incredibly important to a lot of people. They do it in a meaningful way. It shapes their interactions, definitely. But I guess that doesn't mean that in a broader sense, it impacts any of their decisions to, you know, concrete their lawn because it's easier for
yeah.
them or to, stop like to protest maybe hedges being removed. Like they might not be more meaningfully engaged in things that maybe some people quantify as showing that your relationship with nature is deeper.
I think that's true. I think Britain's divided. It's a very divided country now,
Yeah,
as we know, but it's very much divided between people who get nature and people who don't.
yeah,
People often say this is a middle class thing. That's nonsense. I know so many bird watchers who come from a whole range of backgrounds, and
definitely.
now genders, social backgrounds, you know, sexuality, all those things.
Yeah.
It has gone from being blokes with beards and a few old ladies, literally, when I was growing up, and kids, to, it's far more, as you know from visiting Global Bird Fair, it's far more diverse than it used to be, which is great. So, it's as I say, I found this study odd, but I want to take a closer look at it to find out why. But where academics like this are absolutely correct is we are the most nature depleted country in Europe, apart from Ireland, which is a complete basket case. But that's partly because Ireland is on the edge of the continent, so it has for various biological reasons, has fewer birds and smaller numbers of them and less variety than even Britain. But yeah, the way we deal with agriculture, and the irony is, we talk about the robin. The robin is Britain's second commonest bird after the wren, and it's doing really well. And it's doing really well because of gardens.
Yeah.
Gardens, parks, robins are very adaptable and they do very well, not just because, actually, mostly not us feeding them, because just the way we garden, it creates for most, in many gardens, small,
Uh,
there's lots of insect and invertebrate food that isn't in the
yeah.
wild side. So yeah, robins are doing fine. They even adapt quite well to the climate crisis, which is really interesting. So yeah, robins are fine, but everything else is stuff.
Yeah. Well, here we go. We get into that bit, the bit where we're going to get into the darker side of it. I've been digging into something that really, really caught my attention because basically in the film, the cat is this purring, velvet voiced villain, as you mentioned, the incredible Gillian Anderson. And I found myself wondering, like, how close does that actually come to reality that pets are causing problems for garden birds? It turns out it is quite close to the reality. So even though Robin Robin maybe should have picked a starling, domestic cat as a villain, hey, they did really well.
Yeah,
And the more I looked into this, the more I found myself down that rabbit hole. So, firstly, I guess we should point out the domestic cats aren't native to the UK. They were
absolutely.
they were introduced by the Romans. So, technically, they kind of count as an invasive species.
Yeah, they are an invasive species. I had a big argument with someone. I gave a talk at a bookshop recently. He just wouldn't accept this. He said, "Well, they're here," and I said, "Yeah, I know. They've been here a very long time." And it's a tricky one,
Yeah.
non-native species, because things like the hare have we think of them as British, but again, they were brought by the Romans. But the key thing
Yeah.
about cats is not that they're non-native, although that is important because it means things haven't evolved to cope with them in the way
Mm-hmm.
they have with sparrowhawks, for example.
Yeah.
The main reason is cats are kept and fed, and therefore their numbers are not limited by their prey. Now, this is what happens with sparrowhawks. There are various organisations in Britain, and I won't mention their names, but there are campaigners, and they're mostly people run by gamekeepers and landowners. But
Yeah.
they believe that predators are far too common far commoner than they used to be. Absolutely true, much commoner. And therefore, predators, particularly sparrowhawks, would be a good example,
Yeah.
are killing all our garden birds and should be eradicated. Now, the key thing about a predator is that its numbers are utterly and totally limited by its availability of prey.
Of course.
So if you're a sparrowhawk and you eat birds of a certain size, mostly small garden bird type things or woodland birds, you cannot eradicate them.
No.
Because if you did, you wouldn't survive. And actually, they, like most predators, like lions, they miss most times. We think of these
Yeah.
as lethal predators, but they're not, most of the time they miss. Cats are different because things haven't evolved to cope with them, but mainly because their numbers are not limited by this factor or any other factor.
Yeah.
Cats are limited by the number of people willing to buy and feed them, which is a lot. And we have
Yeah.
millions of cats in Britain, and they're let out, and a lot of them kill a lot of things. Now, you quoted some statistics. You mentioned them in the notes you sent me, and you're quite right that millions, something like 55 million
Yeah,
birds.
55 million birds.
Now,
So,
you have to be careful with that because most of the creatures killed by cats are going to be young ones. So,
yeah,
newly fledged birds, sick birds, starving birds, and small mammals.
yeah.
Generally, the fit ones will get away.
Hmm.
And so it has been argued by biologists, not by people who are campaigning for this, that cats do not have quite the effect that we think because millions and millions of birds die every year.
Yeah,
Someone once said, let's do the maths. Blue tits have between sort of 6 and 10 young. They all survive. They all breed the following year. They all have 6 or 10 young. At what point are we literally wading knee deep through blue tits? And the answer is about 4 or 5 years. So if everyone survived,
Yeah.
we would, so of course they all die. 95% of small birds or whatever it is, it's a huge number, will be dead.
Yeah.
Something like 50% before their first birthday, and by their fourth or fifth birthday, it's for most birds, it's going to be nearly 100%. But that's fine because they have more.
Mm.
And so the cat thing is a tricky one. I personally dislike cats. I don't like them in a way I
Yeah.
like dogs. My dog Rosie did, I'm afraid, when she was little, used to chase and occasionally catch a small bird and kill it, and I felt
Oh,
terrible. Um, but generally, she's not let out at dawn and dusk. She's not, and cats are just really good. They're really impressive. Look at
yeah.
a cat, look at a lion. And, they are impressive animals. So I have a personal antipathy towards cats. And that's probably based on actually the fact that they kill a lot of small birds. However, I also completely understand that cats, my colleague Gail loves cats, who she keeps them. She's very fond of them, as I am of my dog. I get it,
Yeah.
and I get the fact that cats are wonderful for people. They're great therapy. They calm you down.
Yeah.
It's just a pity that some cat owners do not put a bell on them, do let them out at dawn and dusk, which is the two times you shouldn't let them out. By night, most birds are roosting, and by day, they're pretty good at escaping. But dawn and dusk, is the time where birds are more vulnerable. And so the cat in the film is probably the most realistic element, and it brings drama and it's scary, and that's just the fact. So cats are a tricky one. The
They
RSPB have never come out to campaign against cats because they want
No. I
emphasis.
found that really
They
interesting.
should do.
When
I
I when I
think,
did
but they won't. You know.
when I did the research, I did find that really interesting. It was lots of caveats to numbers. I mean, firstly, basically there hasn't been enough of a comprehensive study anyway, so there is lots of backwards and forwards on it. The Independent ran a piece in 2022 with the sort of alarmist headline: pet cats kill up to 270 million animals a year in the UK alone, and it branded them mini super predators. uh, but I decided to kind of look at an academic study. So I looked at a 2018 study from researchers at Reading in collaboration with the RSPCA. So they looked more tangibly at 3,600 birds that had been brought into four of their wildlife
Yeah.
centres after being attacked by cats.
Yeah.
And the stat they came up with was that 78% of those didn't survive.
Yeah.
And I thought that was quite interesting because obviously those are the ones being brought in that obviously look like they had a chance. Nobody is bringing in
Yes.
dead
Yes. They're not
birds,
counted the dead.
you know?
Yes.
So
Well,
so
yeah.
that I thought, oof, actually the fact that they have brought them in at all meant that they looked like they had a fighting chance, maybe.
A guy in America called Peter Mara wrote a very good book called Cat Wars, and there are a lot of feral cats in the
Yeah.
world, particularly in developing world countries, particularly in warmer climates like Italy. They survive very well. Cats escape and they breed and they, do very well. And he believes that all cats, feral cats, should be eradicated
Oh, wow.
humanely. And of course, in New Zealand and Australia, no
Yeah.
one would bat an eyelid if I said that.
No.
100% of people in New Zealand agree with the scheme they've got at the moment called Predator Free. I think it's 2050, where they are going to eradicate all introduced mammals, both
Oh.
wild species and cats. And Gail, my friend, and you clearly are very, antipathetic towards that, and I get that completely. But I sort of agree with
You
him
know what it
because
is? I get it, but I just think imagine applying that to humans. To me, you're not far off your racist reformers.
yeah, but this is yes, you
I
get
can't help it. That's
when
how
we
I
talk
feel
about
about it.
when we talk about non-native, yeah, but it is
Yeah.
different. I think it is qualitatively different. The language is similar. This is the problem
Mm.
we talk about alien species,
And
non-native
so
species.
dismissive of their right to exist. Like I know that it isn't the same because the right of that introduced species to exist is stopping a native species from existing and potentially wiping them off the planet.
Yes.
Like I get it, but I also think that doesn't make any difference to the individual
Yeah,
ones that you are eradicating.
it's a major moral issue. It's a moral quandary. And like most wet liberals, as I am, I feel bad that I don't feel worse. And I can literally see both sides of it because
Yeah,
in New Zealand, the reason you have to eradicate non-native mammals is they will literally make other things go extinct.
yeah,
That will not
of
happen in
course.
Britain.
No,
British wildlife, like most not oceanic islands, basically, our wildlife has evolved to cope with change in a way that places like Pacific Islands or New Zealand haven't. But
yeah,
the terrible story of the Stevens Island wren, which was a bird that was probably flightless, and it wasn't a wren. It was a bird that looked like a wren. It was in one of the Australasian families, and this was off New Zealand, I think, or Australia. I should know this. And the lighthouse keeper turned up in 1894, and he had a cat, and by 1895 the bird was extinct.
no, no.
It's only found on that island, and so in a limited way in certain places, including New Zealand. But as I say,
Yeah,
if we were having this conversation here and the audience listening will probably divided about 50-50, probably half the audience feel ambivalent about this, and a quarter think we should never kill anything, and a quarter think we should kill any non-native predator.
yeah.
I would say that would be the typical thing. In New Zealand, it'd be 100% kill them.
Well, when I visited New
Absolutely.
Zealand,
And the New Zealand people are not more, you know, they're not less, in fact, they're more realistic than us in many ways. But I get the moral thing. And you're right, we've caused the problem.
yeah,
So to eradicate something, if you can humanely trap it and relocate it, that's
exactly.
a better thing. But that is not practical
No,
with
I know. But
certain animals. It's practical with things like the hedgehogs on the US, which were eating all the eggs of the wading birds, and they did it, and they did it brilliantly. And
yeah,
but it's interesting though when you talk about eradicating rats to save storm petrels and puffins, people
yeah.
go, yeah, that's fine, and
But I
it's.
don't feel like that either because I like them too.
But
I
if you
just,
don't do it, an island like Lundy had two pairs of puffins on it. It's now got 500 pairs or something. So,
yeah,
if we like puffins, and it's the same thing with grey squirrels and red squirrels, it's a tricky one. There are
yeah,
people eradicating grey squirrels in certain parts of Britain.
I know. I just,
We've got into a complicated moral argument now, but it is a moral and ethical
yeah.
argument. Yeah, it's also a practical argument.
It's also the fact of, I just think we also live in a world where, because of globalization and our rampant consumerism, we see all the time things arriving in cargo. Now we've
Yes,
got better at that, but you're telling me that New Zealand will eradicate all of that stuff and then nothing else will ever get in. But to be fair, New Zealand has the
probably
most
not mammals. Yeah,
robust
it,
checks
it,
that I've ever seen.
yeah, it will probably. I mean, certain things will. Yeah, insects and plant things. Yeah, we absolutely have. But plant diseases, the ash dieback disease,
Yeah,
came because people who wanted to plant ash trees, they imported them from the Netherlands.
yeah,
And the ash diabetic disease had reached Europe from, I think, from Asia. Yeah, and you're right. Globalization absolutely does that. We have Chinese mitten crabs in the Thames. We have Korean sea squirts in the Mersey docks.
yeah,
Generally creatures like that. I mean, funnily enough, mitten crabs do harm because they destroy the banks and encourage flooding. The sea squirts are fine. This is the problem. We don't know. But yeah, going back to cats, it's a tricky one. We can't eradicate cats from Britain,
no. And I don't want to
nor should
eradicate
we try.
cats. But you
But we
mentioned,
can do practical things to
yes,
stop
you
it.
mentioned putting a bell on it and you mentioned dawn and dusk. And the thing is, cat flaps have evolved so well now. You can have timers on them, you can have chips on them, maybe. So
Exactly.
there's that. Is there any other practical thing apart from those things?
I think that's it. I think though you're right. Using technology is a clever way of doing it. Technology has its harms, but that's a classic example where yeah, you have a cat flap that the cat can't get out apart from between, I don't know, an out 2 hours after sunrise and 2 hours before sunset. Fine.
Yeah. And that's
Cat's
still a
happy.
huge window of time.
Yeah.
Now, I promised the listeners the shit sandwich. So I am going to
Oh, I
ask
thought we'd
you.
had that with the cat.
Well, yeah, we had the nasty bit. So I've got to give the nice bit now.
Oh,
So
right.
We are going to start rounding off with a really nice little question I've got for you. Now, you've already mentioned on this without me needing to tell listeners that about one of your children. So you mentioned Charlie earlier. You're a big family man. We've also heard about your dog, which I called Holly, and that is not her name, Rosie.
Oh, Rosie.
Rosie, yeah, I my friend has a
Holly's
black
good.
lab
Christmas
called
dog.
Holly. Yeah, that's what it is. It was like Rosie. So you're a family man, children, pets, you live in a beautiful home in Somerset. Do you have any festive traditions at home or any wildlife moments that feel particularly Christmassy to you?
It's not so much Christmas. We used to do a thing at the BBC Natural History Unit where I worked. My old friend and colleague Martin Hughes Games came up with a thing called the Naturalist Unit Christmas Cup, which was you had to go out in that dead week between Boxing Day and New Year's Day,
Yeah.
um, and count as many birds as you could. And it worked quite well. It was fun. We did it for a few years and then we all left and stopped it. I have a big New Year's Day tradition, although because we do tend to stay up till midnight, we don't go out anymore. We watch telly because we're old.
Are you
Um,
watching Jules Holland?
yes,
That's
usually,
yeah,
yeah.
that's what my
And
parents watch every
I
year.
tend to now go out on the 2nd of January. So in my garden on the 1st of January, I start counting the birds because I keep lists. My friend
Yeah.
Graham says I keep lists of lists. But I go out to our local patch, which is on three rivers, the Huntsbill, the Parrot, and the Brew on the Somerset coast. And I go there before dawn, usually on the 2nd or 3rd of January, and I stand by the old rectory by the medieval church and watch the egrets come out and listen to the robins singing and usually wren
Oh.
calling and blue tit, whatever. And I keep a list of the birds I see that day. Now, I normally finish by about lunchtime. In fact, this year Graham and I did it, and we finished. We went to the pub at lunch and then went home because we'd sort of seen everything, but we'd seen something like 65 species of birds.
65.
Which is, I mean, I see on this local patch of mine, I've just got over 100 for the year. I think my record for the year was about 110 species. So I see well over half the birds I'm going to see in the entire year, and probably more than a third of the birds I'm going to see anywhere in the entire year in one day in one place. And it's fascinating because you go around and you're thinking, haven't seen kestrel, haven't seen housesparrow yet, where's the collared doves, all the common things. And what it does, and a lot of birders do this on the 1st of January or close to it, is that it it's like the birds are afresh. You're listening to
Oh,
the wren, and I love that. It's that special thing of starting the year,
yeah.
and it's always been a tradition. It's called a big day or a New Year's Day count. And people do it in Somerset. They get over 100 species if they drive around. I've never done that. I might try that next year, but I love the fact that this is my place and every year's different. And some years I get something really unexpected, and
Hmm.
some years I miss something really expected.
Where would you base yourself if people listening to this would be screaming if I don't ask you this? If they wanted to try and replicate the experience you're talking about, specifically in Somerset, have you got one location that you would do that at, or a couple that you
I
would
think
shout out?
any location near your home, it can be your garden if you live in the country particularly, or you live in a town and you've got a proper garden, that's fine, or city. But it's nice doing a garden, starting your garden list, watching things that fly over, that counts as well. They don't have to land in the garden, so things like gulls, buzzards. Um, but if you have a local patch, that to me is the best advice you can have. Ideally with some water, gravel pits are very good, local nature reserves are very good. Um, Near your home and visit it for the year and start the list on New Year's Day or close to New Year's Day and keep the list for the year. And you'll notice, the first swallows coming back in late March or early April. You'll get surprises. Last year, Graham said, "Oh my goodness, there's a sand martin," and it was something like March the 2nd. Probably the
Wow,
first sand martin of the year in Somerset. So we go out to that place, we enjoy a chat, and we put the world to rights and look at the birds and count them. Um,
that sounds
yeah, it's
delightful.
about the local patches are really important because they're somewhere you visit and you get the concept. I had them when I was a kid, but not really. I was in my 30s when I discovered one when I lived in West London, and I realized that you each from month to month, particularly from year to year, you think, oh, the chiffchaffs are earlier this year or later, or the swallows are later, or whatever, the
Yeah.
swifts if you live in the city, or the house martins. Um, and to me, that's the joy of the local aspect of birding that also means that these birds are coming from all over the world
Yeah.
to
It
you.
is
And
kind
that
of
happened during
magical.
lockdown. I wrote the book Skylarks with Rosie about my
Mhm.
lovely dog and the walks we did during lockdown, where there were a number of species of warbler singing in the back of my house, basically in my
Yeah.
garden and about a mile from where I live. That was our limit that we could walk for the first few weeks of that lockdown in 2020. And they had come from all four corners of Africa, literally chiffchaffs and blackcaps from the north, whitethroats and sedge warblers and reed warblers from the west, lesser whitethroat, very shy bird from the east, and willow warbler from South Africa. So these birds had turned up in our little world that was
Yeah.
limited more than at any other time in our lives.
It's so humbling
And
sometimes.
yeah, and that for me is that's the joy of birding. And then you've also got the robin and the house. I mean, house sparrows probably don't travel more than half a mile from where they were born.
Oh,
And then
really?
house martins go all the way to Africa. So there you are.
What a beautiful world to live in. Oh, Stephen, thank you so much for being my guest. It's absolutely always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm really, really excited that you picked such a wonderful topic for us to cover today. And hopefully, our listeners will all enjoy hearing about the robin. Thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Kelly, as always. Yeah, buy the books. My wife likes it when people buy my books because I
Yeah, of
get
course.
and come to Global Bird Fair next year, where I will hopefully see you and many other
Oh, I
friends,
hope so.
fellow birders.
Hopefully
Yeah,
I'm invited back to record live again. I've
I
still
think
got one of my episodes to come out from Bird Fair actually that I'm excited about. One about beavers, so that's on the list.
but it's the second. I think it's the second weekend of July now in Rutland. It's a
Yeah.
wonderful event. You don't have to be a hardcore, serious birder to go there. It's incredibly friendly. It's full of people. Come and say hello. Kelly will be there. I'll be there. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I can start. You'll be sorry when you've said that. I'll start directing everyone to you. Stephen said you could go and say hello, and I'll be like, this is where Stephen
I
is.
love it. I love
Yeah, it's
it.
true. You do
I'm
love it.
terrible because I have the terrible face blindness. So people come up to me and go, "Hi," and I'm thinking, "I know you, but I can't remember where from." And they say, "I'm your daughter." Oh yes.
Elliot explains. So, I know that Robin Robin has been mentioned in the previous episode, or this episode, and recently I watched it, and I just think that it's a really wholesome story, and how Robin wants to be a mouse, but she just can't. But then she learns that she belongs as a robin, and she still fits in as a robin. Also, once I went to Beamish Living Museum of the North, and I came across a robin that was actually photogenic. So we have a couple of pictures of it. Elliot explains.